Chang at the GeekWire Summit in Seattle. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Google, Facebook, and Twitter are scrambling to hold Washington and further regulation at bay as a result of the Russian political ad scandal. So what is the game plan for the tech giants ahead of being called to Congress next month? Also, we will cover how Seattle has transformed into a tech hub and one of the centers of innovation. And one of Seattle's biggest players, of course, is Microsoft. We'll sit down for an exclusive interview with the company's president, Brad Smith. But first, to our lead. Tech giants are bracing themselves in the face of prospective congressional regulation coming their way. The revelations that ads paid for by Russia on all of their platforms to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election have sent companies into a PR crisis. They are calling lawmakers. They are upping lobbying budgets. They are hiring crisis management firms as they get ready for a November 1st public hearing on Capitol Hill. Joining me now to discuss, Sarah Fryer, who has been covering this story for Bloomberg, and Ed Lazowska, the Bill and Melinda Gates Chair at the University of Washington, a longtime computer science professor. Ed, thanks so much for joining us. Sarah, though, I'm going to start with you. You just wrote a story about the great lengths that these tech companies are taking to minimize the damage, if you will, including calling lawmakers personally. Talk to us about these efforts.
So these companies all need to figure out exactly how much responsibility they should take, exactly how much change they should promise. These are all very difficult issues that they've sort of grown to the scale that they're at now by having these ad platforms that you can transact on automatically. It has really helped propel their massive growth. And now that it's clear that those were abused ahead of the U.S. presidential election, it's something that lawmakers are starting to try to understand and trying to think about how they should regulate them. It's really been something that no one's really cared about quite as much as they do now. And the companies are coming to terms with that and trying to figure out what the next steps are.
And you're actually going to be in Washington on November 1st covering these hearings. It's the same day, though, as the Facebook earnings call. So Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, not expected to testify?
They're not expected to testify. I think that we'll likely see somebody who has a little bit more technical knowledge. That's what senators have asked for. My money's on Alex Stamos, the head of security for Facebook, who's been really handling this investigation, although I haven't confirmed that.
So, Ed, Zuckerberg has apologized for minimizing the extent of fake news, the problem of fake news. Do you buy it?
Not for a minute. Zuckerberg began by saying that it was a crazy idea that misinformation influenced the election. I think Sarah got it right. You just have to follow the money here. This isn't a PR crisis. It's a technical crisis, and it's almost a moral crisis.
So
right?
What is their responsibility here?
It seems to me your first responsibility is to take your responsibility seriously, and that's what Facebook failed to do for a long period of time. And let's talk about another company for a second. Let's talk about our friends at Uber. Anything that built the business was okay. It was okay with the CEO, it was okay with the employees, it was okay with the board, it was okay with the VCs, as long as it built the business. Facebook is in the business of selling ads, right? So we know now that they had people embedded in at least the Trump campaign, helping the Trump campaign buy ads micro-targeted to dozens of individuals. There was an article, I think, in the New York Times or the Washington Post that said, hey, they took a trick from U.S. business's playbook. And, I think foreign manipulation of the election was aided and abetted by companies turning a blind eye to what was going on.
Okay, let's talk about that point, Sarah. 60 Minutes, the digital director of the Trump campaign said that they had Facebook employees embedded in their campaign. What is the significance of this?
This is one of the things that I've heard internally. Facebook executives are very dismayed to hear how people think that they had a sort of partisan hand in the election, which of course they don't feel like they did. Their response to that embedding report is that, well, of course we help them. We help everyone. We offered help to Hillary Clinton. We didn't really need to put people in her offices the way we did with Trump because she was operating out of New York, and we have an office in New York. So they didn't really see the issue there. They thought that this is totally normal, something that we would do with a major retailer before Black Friday or a movie studio before the release of a major motion picture. So yeah, again, Facebook is just trying to come to terms with the fact that people don't understand how its business works and not understanding so much how these things can be interpreted in this kind of, now that people are looking at through the lens of understanding how Facebook was used ahead of the election.
So, Ed, do you think that we can trust these companies to self-police here? Do we need regulation? How do we compel
I think
change?
Congress has got to get involved, but I also think it's a very difficult technological problem to deal with, for example, fake news at scale, right? On the other hand, I believe that there was a willful blind eye to what was going on.
And what about when it comes to advertising and where the dollars are coming from?
Oh, I don't know what to say about that, to be honest. If I were good at business, I'd be in business.
All right, Ed Lazowska, you are sticking with me. University of Washington, longtime computer science professor Sarah Fryer, who covers Facebook, is covering this story for us. Sarah, thank you so much for stopping by. All right, SoftBank is leading a $93 million investment in an AI software startup. Pittsburgh-based Pentum makes software that can be used by a variety of industries, including data centers, healthcare, and more. The company's technology is intended to simplify the process for companies to use machine learning applications at scale. Coming up, Seattle's tech scene is on the rise, but how does it compare to Silicon Valley? We will discuss with Canvas Ventures co-founder and general partner Rebecca Lin. That's next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Well, Seattle has seen a boom in venture capital investment in the last few years. In 2015, Seattle-based companies racked up $2.1 billion in funding, but that is still dwarfed, of course, by Silicon Valley. This is according to data from PitchBook, the research company. As of May of this year, companies in Seattle have received roughly $600 million. Joining us now to discuss how the Seattle scene stacks up to Silicon Valley is Canvas Ventures co-founder and general partner Rebecca Lin. Rebecca, great to have you back here on the show.
Thank you.
It's been a few years.
A little while.
You met with a few companies this morning in Seattle.
I did indeed.
What trends are you seeing here? How is it different from Silicon Valley?
I think it's amazing. We have, two of the richest men in the world here that founded amazing companies with Bezos and Bill Gates. And the startup scene continues to evolve here. I think it's always been strong. But when you go around Seattle, you just see the amazing number of new companies that have come up. And I met with 3 companies this morning and probably could fill 3 days with companies back to back that are high quality.
You invest across a range of sectors, fintech especially.
Exactly.
What's your take on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
I think it's early. I think Bitcoin as a currency is more in the sort of the gambling category is where I would put it. And
what about a fraud? Because that's what Jamie Dimon says.
I think there are the bad actor cases of Bitcoin and in terms of just out and out fraud. I think ICOs, when you get into the ICO market, there are some use cases that I think can make a ton of sense. And so when you look at ICOs, probably the thing that has made the most sense to me, which is not really what we're seeing it used for too much, is instead of debt financing, right? So an example is a company in South Africa that was doing solar panels and sold each individual solar cell, and then the annuity on that income from the individual solar cell was the sort of the currency, in other words, right? So instead of having to have a big CapEx outlay up front, you could see it for companies of that nature. So I think that's really exciting, actually.
So when it comes to areas to invest in, what do you think is hot? Like, what's of interest to you and what's not?
What's hot and what's not? So what's hot, I think fintech is always hot. Fintech, there's a $1 billion fintech company plus in every single cycle. I think fintech continues to reinvent the entire banking system, and I think we're moving I'm moving more into real estate. I just did Roofstock as an investment that we're really excited about. So I think fintech will just continue to be hot in different sectors. I think what's cooled is more of the lending space in fintech.
Well, you did invest in Lending Club early on. They went public in 2014. They've had some issues. They've got a new CEO. What do you think about the risks associated with this and the scandal?
Yeah. No, I think with Lending Club, it was a CEO transition, right? And so Scott Sanborn stepped up. He was an amazing CMO for that company and has done a really great job leading that company through that executive transition. And so I think in that case, it was just a case of a management transition, not a fundamental case in the business model itself.
So there's been a rash of sexual harassment stories in tech, women at tech companies, in VC among venture capitalists. What's it going to take to change?
Yeah, and I get asked this, and I can tell you personally, I haven't been sexually harassed, which it's kind of funny in a way because I get asked this all the time. But I think it's setting the right example, to be honest, more from the men than the women. So I think it just has to not be tolerated. And I think we're seeing that. I think what we're seeing these days is really people stepping up and saying, hey, this isn't okay. And I think that's what it's going to take.
Sexual harassment is one thing, but what about discrimination? Have you faced that?
I've been lucky. I haven't. I've always been in a male-dominated industry. When I was an engineer, I was the only female in the classroom often, and I feel like, for me at least, it's actually more often than not worked in my favor. But it's not that I haven't seen it. And so I think for that, again, it's people saying something about it. When they see it, you say something about it. And you don't let it go. And I think that's how you can change it.
When the James Damore Google engineer memo came out, in which he said that he thinks there are biological reasons for the lack of women in engineering and in leadership, you said to the New York Times, there's a high awareness right now, which is positive, but at the same time there's a fear. Many men feel now like they have a gun to their head.
Well, and
but I wonder, is the fear, is that what it's going to take?
I hope not. I mean, I would say that the huge majority of men that I've worked with in my career, when they heard about these things coming out, they themselves were mortified, right, that this was happening. And so what I worry about are people going too extreme to where they're afraid of taking meetings with women, right? And these are or they're afraid of, inviting women out to dinner for a business meeting, or all very normal things guys would do together, right? And I worry about that because I feel like that will set us back even further. So I think there's a sort of an awareness and a level of it, just not accepting it, that needs to happen.
Okay, so if they should be taking these meetings, doing these dinners, how do you make sure these things don't happen?
In terms of just...
How do you make sure nothing crosses a line? How do you make sure that women are included?
Yeah, I think you be inclusive. I think you ask yourself, would everyone feel comfortable that's on the team if we're having this dinner, we're going to this event? And I often do that myself, right? In terms of my entire team, would everyone want to go and do this event or this activity? And sometimes you have to make sacrifices that are better, for the overall group. And then I think a lot of it is just a judgment call. I will tell you. I mean, the guys that you see that are accused of these issues and doing these things, it's not like a one-off kind of thing, right? It's sort of a repeat occurrence. And I would say it's not endemic in the industry. It really are there specific kind of bad actors that hadn't been called out before and that are now.
All right, Rebecca Lynn, Canvas Ventures, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Here
Thank you.
On the show. All right. Coming up, much more from Seattle. University of Washington's Ed Lazowska helped transform the region as a leader of computer science education. He will join us next. This is Bloomberg. Now to a story we are watching. Uber says its UK drivers would face broad changes if required to be classified as employees with benefits. It is a sign the company is considering alternatives to its labor model after tighter scrutiny from regulators. Uber would become more like a private hire car service that exerts more control over when and where drivers work. The statement is a rare instance in which the company said how it may adjust if a government implements new labor laws. Well, Seattle has turned into a hub for tech and innovation, to say the least. Outside of tech giants like Amazon and Microsoft, it's also home to a growing number of startups that could lead to a new wave of AI and cloud computing. Here to discuss all that and more, we are joined once again by Ed Lazowska, who holds the Bill and Melinda Gates Chair at the School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington, one of the top computer science programs in the country. Ed, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you back. So, look, Amazon and Microsoft are essentially a duopoly in Seattle. What are the advantages of that, and what are the risks?
You know, you just saw the Amazon HQ2 announcement recently.
Right.
And it's pretty interesting. It seems to me that they need to geographically diversify.
But is that a blow for the city?
Well, in many ways, yes. I mean, Amazon is just phenomenal, as is Microsoft, but we can't be a one-horse town, and Amazon can't be a one-town horse, right? So in some sense, this makes sense. To me, the important thing for us in Seattle is to figure out what caused Jeff Bezos to move here in 1993 and what allowed him to grow this great company with 50,000 employees in Seattle, and how do we keep that going? And the fact that Amazon needs to geographically diversify is, I think, pretty obvious.
Yeah.
At the same time, we want them to keep growing in Seattle, and it was just announced they've leased another 700,000 square feet downtown. So it's an amazing contributor to our economy.
I know you've been taking a close look at Trump's policies and the impact on the tech industry. How do you see these policies impacting the industry in the long term?
Well, in the long term, we all know the statistics on the entrepreneurs in this country. A stunning proportion of them were born elsewhere and moved here. The people from everywhere in the world come to the United States to get graduate education, undergraduate education. They historically have stayed here and built great companies and driven our economy, and we're now telling them we don't want them anymore. This is crazy, so it has to change. And Seattle's companies have been at the leading edge of this. You saw that Amazon was, for example, one of the first companies to join the challenge to the travel ban. Microsoft has been foursquare and Amazon in committing to provide defense for its employees. So this is critical to the tech industry. It's critical to universities as well. These are some of our best students.
Speaking of students, you know, AI, cloud computing, machine learning, these are areas of tech and innovation that are exploding. Do we have the resources to train students to be ready for these jobs, or is there a coming skills gap?
There is a huge skills gap in this country, not in STEM as a whole, but in computer science, right? There is a workforce gap in this state, okay? The gap between degrees granted and jobs available in computer science is 4 times as great as the gap in all other areas of engineering combined.
In Washington?
In Washington.
In the country? Wow.
Nationally, the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that 73% of all the newly created jobs in the next decade in all of STEM will be in computing. Okay, and 55% of all available jobs, whether newly created or available due to retirements. So it's all computer science all the time. We've got to get more kids interested in the field. We've got to educate them better and faster, and we've got to send them to grow our great companies.
And I know you are incredibly passionate about diversity in computer science, women in computer science. What's the progress you're seeing? Let's start there.
That's a good question. It's being taken far more seriously by far more universities and far more companies. The University of Washington has a long way to go, but we graduated twice as high a percentage of women in computer science last year as the national average. Not nearly enough, but we're working hard on it. Melinda Gates has taken up the challenge a year ago and was the keynote at the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing just last week. When I went to the first Hopper conference in 1994, there were 500 attendees, 15 or so of us who were men. This year it was 18,000 people.
So what are the challenges that remain? I mean, what's still not going right for women in computer science in schools, in universities?
Let me tell you what I think the great hope is, first of all. I think the great hope is code.org, which is a Seattle operation, right? Hadi Partovi, twice from Microsoft, twice from startups.
He's
took
been on
this
the
on
show.
as his
We've
latest challenge. And, you know, in the first hour of code that Hadi ran several years ago, more women and more underrepresented minorities spent an hour programming than in the entire 50-year history of the field. So this is going to create a groundswell of students coming up from elementary school who demand more computer science, and it's going to change education. So I think interesting young women in this is important. To me, the really important thing is computer science spent 50 years making things smaller and faster and less expensive, and it's been a great run, but that doesn't speak to making society a better place. And the next 50 years of computer science are going to be how we impact healthcare, how we impact education, how we impact energy efficiency, okay? How we impact the developing world. That's what computer science is about these days, and that's going to attract a far more diverse group of people to the field because they care about societal challenges, not about faster, smaller, cheaper.
So what's the responsibility of the industry, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, Apple,
Well, I think the responsibility
on impacting the pipeline?
Let's see. I think one thing companies can do is ensure that they are great places for everyone to work, and the mature companies have done that. Google has done it. Microsoft has done it. You just have to pick up the newspaper to see how the newer, smaller companies are doing. There's still a terrible bro culture. It's a complicated thing. I think, entrepreneurism breeds people who push the envelope, and they may push the envelope in terms of their corporate culture as well. So I think making it clear that these are great jobs, that everybody's welcome. The most important thing to me is that we need a diverse workforce in computer science because we're in a creative process. We're crafting, engineering complex systems in a creative process, and if there are points of view that aren't represented or underrepresented, you get a worse outcome. There are going to be problems you don't consider, solutions you don't consider. So even if you don't care about social equity or anything like that, if you're just a crass capitalist who wants to sell more stuff, you want a diverse workforce.
Ed, we'll have to leave it there. You're sticking with us to the next block. Ed Lazowska of the University of Washington will be back with more from the GeekWire Summit. We're going to be talking to Microsoft President Brad Smith about these issues and more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. The Associated Press reports an official says the Spanish government will hold an emergency cabinet meeting Wednesday after Catalan President Carles Puigdemont and lawmakers signed what they called a declaration of independence from Spain. The document's implementation was delayed to allow for dialogue with the central government in Madrid. Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy says he'll take all steps to prevent Catalan independence. Before President Puigdemont addressed the Catalan parliament, the European Commission President Donald Tusk urged the Catalan leader to resist a formal call for independence and instead work with the Spanish government to find a solution.
Diversity should not and need not lead to conflict, whose consequences would obviously be bad for the Catalans, for Spain, and for the whole of Europe.
Tusk made his comments in Brussels. He said the future of the European continent depends on, quote, what unites us. British Prime Minister Theresa May's office released a statement detailing a phone call she had with President Trump today. The Prime Minister stressed the importance of the Iran nuclear deal, an accord President Trump has threatened to decertify. In a letter obtained by ESPN, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell says he believes players should stand for the national anthem. He also says it's time for the league to move past the ongoing controversy. A plan for handling the crisis will be reviewed at the owners' meeting in New York next week. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 8:30 Wednesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, let's start off in New Zealand. Trading's been underway for 30 minutes. Looking kind of flat at the moment, though, despite yet another impressive lead from US equities. The Dow hitting another high, up a third of 1%. We've got West Texas pushing above $50 a barrel again, and gold stronger as well. Over in Japan, Nikkei futures traded out of Chicago up a tenth of 1%, but a little weaker out of Singapore. We'll be keeping an eye, obviously, on Kobe Steel today. The steelmaker hitting limit down on Tuesday after admitting it falsified strength and durability data for some aluminium products. That's having some significant knock-ons. Later on in Japan, we'll be hearing earnings from Family Mart and Lawson. Over here in Australia, ASX futures currently looking higher by about 0.25%. We've got iron ore slipping, though, a little, so the resources sector may weigh. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. We're continuing now with our live coverage of the GeekWire Summit here in Seattle, Washington. One major player, to say the least, in Seattle, of course, is Microsoft. Joining us now, Brad Smith, Microsoft president, and still with me, Ed Lazowska, professor at the University of Washington. Brad, great to have you here.
Thank you.
You are the chief legal officer at Microsoft. You came out stronger than any tech company on DACA, and you have on some of the president's policies saying, if you come after our people, we will support them, we will pay their way. Why?
DACA is an issue that we believe is important for the country and important for our business. As an industry, we critically depend on having the best and brightest, and many of the best and brightest are among these 800,000 people who are registered under DACA. And what we said was, if the government seeks to deport our employees, any of the 44 Microsoft employees who are DACA registrants, we're not going to sit on our hands and just watch. We will pay for them to have legal counsel. We'll file a brief as an amicus. We'll seek to intervene in court. We will be by their side. We want our employees to know that we have their back.
Look, Microsoft has a history of challenging the administration where you believe it's warranted. What are your main concerns with the Trump administration?
Well, the truth is we have a history of working with and challenging basically every administration. We sued the executive branch 4 times when President Obama was heading it during 2017. In part, we're continuing some of the debates that started in the last administration around national security and privacy, the protection of customers. But certainly immigration is a new and bigger and more challenging issue this year. We stepped forward in the wake of the travel ban. We've stepped forward again in the context of DACA. We believe we need an immigration system that's enforced. It needs to be balanced, but we need to recognize that as a country, we absolutely benefit. All of us in this country. It doesn't matter who we are, where we live, or what we do. We all benefit when some of the best and brightest people in the world come and work by our side.
Are you worried about retaliation from the federal government or any sort of blowback? I mean, have they come to you and said, what are you doing?
Well, the good news from our perspective is if we're principled, we explain things clearly, we never make things personal. We stood up strongly for DACA. And I went to a Virginia school with Ivanka Trump to stand up for computer science. Our view is simple. We will partner wherever we can, and we'll stand apart whenever we should.
Ed, what are your thoughts?
I have nothing to add. Brad said it perfectly. This is a really important issue, and Microsoft and Brad are extremely principled, and you see it in all their actions.
So, we were talking about fake news earlier in the show, Facebook, Google, Twitter being called before Congress about these paid for by Russia ads. Have you been looking at Microsoft at whether Russia had any involvement, did the same thing on any of Microsoft's platforms?
We are looking.
Yeah.
We're looking now. We've been looking the last few days. We haven't found anything yet. I think we actually need to think about 2 things. One is what happened in 2016. How can we learn from it? It doesn't matter whether you're Twitter, Facebook, or anybody else. The more we learn, the better we will be. But the question I believe we need to really focus on as a tech sector and a country is not what happened in 2016. How do we prepare for 2018? How do we prepare around the world? There will be a new prime minister elected or one re-elected in Canada in 2019. There will be a presidential race here in the United States in 2020. Let's assume that people are unfortunately going to get more sophisticated in trying to abuse these social media platforms. They're going to get more sophisticated in these cyber attacks on political candidates. How do we get better as a tech sector? How do we work more closely with the government? How do we ask the governments of the world, of the democratic countries of the world, to use their voice together to say, this is an attack on democracy and it needs to stop?
Do you think, Ed, that we can trust companies like Microsoft to self-police, to take on these issues?
Brad, as the lawyer, I think we're going to need some congressional action here.
And I would agree with that. We need to accept once again that as an industry, we have a very high responsibility. We might even have the first responsibility. But it would be a great mistake to think that these fundamental, frankly, illegal acts under international law are something that the tech sector can defeat by itself. It would be like looking out in the streets and seeing people looting and just asking the store owners to put better locks on their stores. We need the governments of the world to rally. This is an attack on democracy, on the democratic infrastructure of our country. The government needs to come together, and the governments of the world need to come together.
Look, Ed suggested earlier that perhaps these tech companies were willfully ignorant in this regard. Do you think so?
I don't think so. I actually don't. I mean, it's the truth is these platforms are large. There are so many people using them. So many different kinds of ads are being purchased that I don't think that it occurred to anybody in the tech sector or anybody in government or anybody in the media last year to ask, are there people from a foreign government buying ads? If it didn't occur to anybody at Bloomberg, I'll bet it didn't occur to us either.
Well, they do say that they started looking into it in June, which was several months before the election. But, they didn't understand, obviously, at that point, the scale. At least that's what they said.
It's a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. Because if you look at all the ads that get purchased on all of the social media sites, it's quite a big haystack. And of course, you're going to get better at finding needles once you figure out what they look like, where to look for them. And I think we're starting as an industry to discern that. And I'll be the first to keep saying, and we need to do more, we need to get better, we need to look ahead because the attacks are going to get more sophisticated. And yet I'll also say, let's not assume that government should do nothing here.
Europe is looking at greater regulation. It could be coming in the United States. Are you concerned about more regulation coming to tech companies? Are you bracing yourself?
I worry less about more regulation and worry more about less thoughtful regulation.
Okay.
I think that there is a place in the world for good regulation. The whole industry is extraordinarily focused on May 25th, 2018. That's the date next year in Europe when the so-called General Data Protection Regulation takes effect. We'll have much stronger privacy protection. I think that's good for people around the world. Anytime it's good for people around the world, it's not bad for tech. It gives us more legal clarity. If we can get good regulations, we'll figure out how to manage them.
Ed, I know you have a question.
I was going to turn us to Seattle for a minute.
Yes.
Be a little parochial.
Yes.
When I moved here, Microsoft was 12 people in Albuquerque. There wasn't a lot of technology here. Times have changed. Baidu yesterday became the 100th company headquartered elsewhere to open an engineering center in the Seattle area in Bellevue. Baidu has 2 ex-Microsofties in leading positions. You've obviously played a role in encouraging to be here. Talk about co-opetition.
Well, I think Seattle is sort of, as we like to joke, the cloud capital of the world. It's definitely cloudy in the weather, but it really, between Amazon and Microsoft and all of these other companies, you're going to find an incredibly fervent engineering environment with lots of creativity. And I think we all benefit as this community grows in the right sort of ways. And as you mentioned, Ed, I was happy to encourage the folks at Baidu. We have a great relationship with them at Microsoft that in part is based on personal relationships and in part goes beyond that. And I think that as the world comes to Seattle, we will have new opportunities to hopefully play a leadership role in the world and create new benefits for the people who grew up here, too.
And yet Amazon is your biggest rival, so to speak, and especially in the cloud, of all places.
Well, and that's great. I mean, we are in an incredibly competitive industry.
Yep.
And the truth is, we have some of the best competitors in the world. I mean, if you want to look at competitors that are doing great work, all you got to do is look at Amazon and Google and Facebook and Apple. But we also work with each other, apropos your point about co-opetition. We need to collaborate in addressing problems like cybersecurity attacks and the like. And at the end of the day, if more people have confidence in the cloud, if we can move the frontier of artificial intelligence forward, this is a big world. There's room for all of us to be successful.
Last question. You may disagree with the administration on a number of social issues, but on tax reform, you may be more in line. What are your thoughts on progressive tax reform?
Well, I think we need tax reform. We've needed tax reform for a couple of decades now. It's really overdue. Perhaps as much as anything, as an international company, we want to see a so-called territorial system, which is what the rest of the world has. Let's get rid of the system we have today that creates these incentives for us and others to keep profits offshore. Let's figure out how to get money back in the United States. Let's put it to work here in the United States. And let's bring our tax system into the 21st century.
All right, Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, chief legal officer, Ed Lazowska, University of Washington computer science professor. Thank you both for having us here in your cloudy city.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed it. All right, coming up, we bring you an exclusive interview with Starbucks CEO Kevin Johnson, where the coffee behemoth sees its biggest market for growth. This is Bloomberg. Apple's plan to challenge Netflix and Amazon in the TV business just got a little bit clearer. The iPhone maker announced plans to release a remake of Steven Spielberg's science fiction series Amazing Stories. That's according to NBC Universal, which is one of the TV companies working with the tech giant. Amazing Stories would be the first original series Apple has agreed to finance since the company hired 2 Sony executives to shepherd its TV production efforts. And we are live here at the GeekWire Summit in Seattle, Washington. Now, one of the biggest names in Seattle, of course, is Starbucks. The company has been founded here 46 years ago. Earlier, we caught up with Starbucks' new CEO, Kevin Johnson, for an exclusive interview. I started by asking about the difference between him and founder and former CEO, Howard Schultz.
Howard is an iconic merchant and founder, and so in many ways, he's got years of intuition, and so I would characterize Howard. He is a much more spontaneous, intuitive sort of leader. With my background in tech and digital, I'm much more thinking about using data to help inform me of decisions and being more intentional about what we do. But at the end of the day, we've worked together for a long time. I value his creativity. I value his point of view, and I think I bring some unique things to the table that are going to help us as a company as we make this transition into the future.
Starbucks has taken a stand on some political and social issues, a plan to hire refugees, for example. You got pushback from conservative shareholders over that. How do you navigate that? And how long do you plan to continue?
Well, Emily, oftentimes people perhaps misinterpret things that we are doing as a political statement. For example, we have an entire pillar of our social impact agenda around opportunity. And that opportunity started with the work that we're doing to hire veterans. You recall we said we would hire 10,000 veterans or spouses. We've exceeded that number. We've upped that commitment to 20,000 by the year 2020. We identified the fact that there's over 6 million young people, ages 16 to 24, who are not in school and not at work. And we started Opportunity Youth, where we now we first committed to hire 40,000 of these young people. We're now hiring 100,000 of them. So the refugee portion is very consistent with that. That was our first global initiative, given the fact that there are refugees in Europe and other countries around the world, that we felt like we could play a role in helping those communities, give those people jobs and opportunities. So in many ways, this is core to who we are, about creating opportunity for people, and it's not about making a political statement.
Do you get any pushback from the board on this? Are they involved?
Well, the board is heavily involved in all this. I mean, and clearly, the things that we do, we work to make sure that they are consistent with our mission. They are not politically driven things that we're trying to do. The fact is we hire military veterans, and they have made our company better. The young people we've hired from Opportunity Youth have been fantastic partners in our stores. They make our company better. So much of this is core to who we are and how we get the talent that we need to create that experience in our stores.
You're also getting some pushback over your paid leave policies, 18 weeks for moms at corporate headquarters, 6 weeks for moms in the stores. How do you reconcile that when the employees on the front line aren't getting the same benefits?
Well, the fact is we offer best-in-class parental leave in our stores compared to anyone else in the industry. And what we do is every year we take feedback from our partners on what's important to them. And so for our partners in the stores, what's been important to them is the increase in wage. And so we've made significant increase in wage for those partners in the store. We've invested over $250 million in wage increase for our partners in the stores, trying to do the right thing for them. But I'd say this is a journey, and we continue to listen to partners and try and do what we believe is right to help them in their unique situations.
You've announced the closure of your Tivana line of stores, which are mostly in malls, right? And, you know, the future of retail is changing. Yeah. If everyone's at home shopping on Amazon, what does that mean for Starbucks?
Well, the good news for Starbucks is we are and always have been a consumer destination, and we think that's one of the key ingredients in retail going forward. Is that we continue to innovate in a way that customers want to come visit versus us trying to intercept traffic in a mall. And so as a result, you know, this last year we've built over 2,000 new Starbucks stores at a time when there's record closures of stores by other retailers. And those stores are posting higher AUVs than they have than prior generations. And so our ability to continue to innovate, to create a great retail experience in our stores, our ability to extend that experience from the brick and mortar to the digital mobile experience are the two key ingredients that we think will power us forward into the future.
Markets around the world are becoming saturated. They've got their coffee now. You know, it's putting pressure on accelerating your expansion in countries like China. What's the plan there? How much faster can you go?
Well, China is our second largest and fastest growing market, and we're now at about 2,800 stores in China. And we are going to we've committed to build more than 500 new stores a year for the next 5 years. China is the biggest growth opportunity before us. Now, the U.S. will continue to grow. The U.S. and China are the two growth engines for Starbucks. And we can build new stores in China for decades and still have opportunity for growth there.
That was Starbucks CEO Kevin Johnson. All right, coming up, the president of Chinese search engine Baidu gives us his take on censorship in China and views on President Trump's policies. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Chinese web search giant Baidu is expanding its presence in the U.S. by opening a new base in Seattle as part of its drive to further develop AI technology. I spoke with Baidu President Yaqing Zhang in an exclusive interview where we talked about his thoughts on President Trump and censorship in China.
If you look at the trajectory, the overall direction, right, China is becoming more open than ever before. And technology industry is growing phenomenally.
Is that the case, though? I mean, when I was in China, Facebook and Twitter were allowed, Google was allowed, and then they all got shut down.
Yeah, one thing is obviously there's a lot of momentum in China for the internet industry, but also it's hugely competitive. Look at the search space we are. There are more search companies in China than U.S. U.S. you have Google and Bing. In China, BATs, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent all have search technology, search business. And then you have probably half a dozen other companies doing search. And every day there are new technologies that compete with us in search. And the whole competition is scorching, it's fierce, it's intense. But I think it's a good thing. It makes us more constructive, innovative. And the Bing is also in China, by the way.
How would you characterize the health of the Chinese economy, particularly the pileup of debt? Do you see a big risk there?
Yeah. Well, overall, Chinese economy is very resilient, and the 6.9% growth in the GDP on such a big, large base, it's amazing. So overall, I don't see a systematic risk. There might be things here or there need to fix. But overall, I'm very confident. I'm not an economist, but for the industry I am in, for the people I talk with, overall, it seems quite healthy.
Are you concerned at all about President Trump cracking down on free trade and cracking down on the relationship with China?
That's really bad. If that happens, America benefits from openness, from talent flow. Any form of protectionism will be bad for U.S. and the world.
My exclusive interview there with Baidu President Yaqing Zhang. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We will have much more coverage from the GeekWire Summit in Seattle Wednesday on Bloomberg Television. We'll be taking a closer look at Amazon operations, speaking with Tony Reed, Amazon's head of Alexa, and Andy Jassy, CEO of Amazon Web Services. And a reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.